So I'm delighted to have a fantastic panel to help me dig into this really interesting topic. I'll leave them to introduce themselves, but Gilbert, Richard, Jim and Edward, thank you so much for joining us today. To start off with, I'd really appreciate it if you could give us a quick summary of the work that you're doing on this topic, and what the intention of that is. What's your goals for the next 5 years? So, Jim, do you want to kick us off?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jim Duffy, CEO of Tracer. Tracer is a connected supply chain platform for the diamond industry, at least in the first instance. We're there to connect up the supply chain from producers, manufacturers, and retailers to ensure that the consumer can see the provenance, traceability, and authenticity of the materials that they have, of these diamonds. That leads us into a lot of other resources that we could track and trace, and we're going to bring that back to probably ecology in the first instance in the producer countries that these diamonds are from. When we consider a connected supply chain, what we need is digital assets to connect everything up, and we think of digital assets at no less than 2 levels. At the material level, so that's diamonds for us, and then also at the documentation and certification level. Those 2 distinct levels give us the ability to see how best to connect up the supply chain, and then above all of this, every good platform comes with applications, and those first insight applications will be released probably early next year. Business efficiency, better ways of connecting with one another. All of these are examples of applications that we'll be releasing over top of our platform.
Brilliant, thank you.
My name is Edward. I'm co-founder of ETEU. So we're working on developing a blockchain-based platform for documentation in the maritime logistics, focusing on the SMEs and the SME freight forwarders. So pretty much we think that kind of blockchain and digital revolution in the logistics, it's not only about the big players, it's about inclusion of everyone in the supply chain, and we believe interoperability between different solutions will play a crucial role in adoption of this technology in logistics. So we're trying to create a specialized solution for SME freight forwarders and SME exporters and importers in order to involve them in this process and make it easy and accessible for them.
Thank you. Gilbert Verdian, founder and CEO of Quant Network. So we're the infrastructure. So what we've done is solved interoperability at scale by interconnecting the underlying blockchains at scale to have interoperability between different types of blockchains, but existing platforms and networks. So currently we're working in Europe with a few hundred banks doing interoperability at the financial infrastructure level. We're working in capital markets doing data assets and interoperability, and that's moved into central banks. And in the supply chain, we're doing quite a lot in the fisheries space, which I can explain a bit later.
I was lucky enough to get the mic that's joined onto me. Richard Stockley is my name, so I head up business development for IBM in blockchain applications in global trade. What that means is I spend 90% of my time working on a platform that we're building in collaboration with Maersk called TradeLens, where we're trying to be the platform of connectivity in maritime supply chains. So essentially sharing the right information at the right time with the right person, around life cycle events of a container as it traverses the globe, as well as all the documentation that's associated with it. The amount of times that the right person doesn't have the right piece of paper and isn't allowed out of a port, and the impact that that has on fouling up the supply chain is a real burden on the industry and on global trade. In addition to that, though, we're hoping that breaking down those data silos will spur innovation in a greater sense. How can greater collaboration between all those entities that are required for global trade bring organizations closer together, bring efficiencies, bring automation, and reduce the costs for consumers like you and me who use the goods that are in those containers.
Wonderful, thank you, Richard. I was actually assured last year by contacts in the pharma sector that they've very much been innovating on their containerization. They've moved from sellotaping floppy disks to the containers and switched over to USBs. So I hope you're keeping up with the real innovators.
Business idea there, yes.
So Richard, you already touched on it, that the project with Maersk is obviously one of the most prominently known and spoken about projects in supply chain and blockchain. So it'd be great to understand, obviously that kicked off in 2017, but you recently invited a few other members to create a consortium rather than a one-on-one partnership. So it'd be great to understand a little bit about why that decision was made and what you're intending to do with that consortia, and whether you're looking to introduce maybe some smaller players into that.
Absolutely, because it's kind of a trite saying these days, and it's thrown around, but it is very true. Blockchain is a team sport. You can't play by yourself. So it was necessary to garner engagement from a broader ecosystem. And also, I think more broadly in blockchain, the types of problems that blockchain is very good at solving are industry problems, where there's a cost or a tax, whether it's administration or whether it's the presence of intermediaries that facilitate trust. There's an industry tax, and blockchain has the potential to be that silver thread that sits in behind processes that allows organizations to collaborate more closely. So generally, in our experience in IBM, there's two ways to kick off a blockchain network, and I would almost say any sort of platform where network effects are important. You either start with a player who's got enough influence to get the ball rolling and get some runs on the board, and through leverage or influence can garner participation from the wider network. Or you start with getting all your friends around the table and all those necessary players, and you agree, okay, how are we going to work together? Now that's kind of the two ends of the spectrum, and there's lots of different ways you can do that in the middle. The consortia approach generally takes you to a better place from a solution, from a functional standpoint, because you have the perspectives of all the ecosystem around the table from day one. But I can't emphasize enough the complexity tax of getting different organizations to agree on what does resiliency mean, how is value derived and contributed, what commercial agreements do we need. That's not trivial. The other side, though, going with that sort of founder level approach, you run the risk of it being seen as a proprietary walled garden. So the way that TradeLens went about it, knowing that the prize for us is being an industry solution that contributes to trade as an industry. We started with Maersk, and that was a great place to start. 20% of global containers, right on. There was a lot of criticism very early on, and we had guys in some of the other big carriers who would be standing up at conferences like this and saying, "We will never join TradeLens. It's run by Maersk. They're our great, they're the great evil." Fast forward a year and a half, and we're all sitting around the same table, figuring out how we can all collaborate closer for the benefit of the industry. So I think the thing that tipped the scales there was us being able to get runs on the board, demonstrating value, demonstrating that there was actually a meaningful line of sight to achieving what we wanted to do as far as joining those participants together. And that proof point really brought those players in, and it's not easy. It's still tricky, but we've now got 5 of the top 6 carriers on board the platform, committed to the platform, which represents 60% of containerized trade globally. So a lot of reasons to be confident, but not an easy journey.
Great, thank you. Really interesting. And I know the rest of the panel all are involved in different ecosystems and have gone about it slightly different ways. I mean, Edward, it'd be great to start with you. Obviously, you're coming at it from an SME-oriented approach. How would you say these consortia of the giants can interplay with the smaller players in the market?
In our opinion, it's pretty much, as you mentioned, it's kind of a team play. So obviously, most of the SMEs don't get the chance to join a consortium with Maersk, IBM, DP World, or anyone else. So we believe solution to this issue, kind of including all members of the supply chain, not the biggest one or not the ones kind of concentrating the biggest flows of trade, is interoperability between different solutions. So we believe if one solution can, let's say, serve certain part of the supply chain with collecting data and information, certificates of origin, house BLs from smaller players, and then kind of communicate it with solutions from the shipping line, etc. So we have similarly a system works with paper documents where you have a master BL and house BL issued by the freight forwarder. We believe there will be two different solutions serving pretty much two different purposes in the supply chain.
Great. Thank you very much. And Jim and Gilbert, do you have any comments on that? What are your experiences with finding the right partners and establishing that relationship?
We love consortium. I mean, what IBM have done with Maersk is amazing. It was a concept, and then you got competitors to sit around the table and play with it, play ball, and it's that competition. And what we need and what we see as a necessity is inter-consortia interoperability. So you're not limiting and having barriers to entry to join a consortia. If the entry price is 10 million plus hosting infrastructure and nodes and all these sort of things, that's only the top 1% of the supply chain. But supply chains, it's a multi-chain environment. Sorry, it's a multi. I got it right. It's a multi-party environment, which really needs interoperability between the smaller players, the bigger players, and the network of networks to be able to interoperate. So we love the work that's happening in this space, and bridging those gaps and those networks allows everyone to be a participant. That the barriers are removed, and at the end of the day, as Richard was saying, the consumer wins because trade flows and the prices come down. So we win in the end.
And just incrementally above all of these things, we've had similar experiences. For us, that partnership across the industry was everything from global mining corporations to mom and pop jewelry stores, and everyone's got to get on board. We can't exclude anyone. If it's going to be a true industry utility, it has to be made for everyone. We've gone through great pains to make sure that service can be distributed to everyone. We've had a lot of wins across the board in terms of, as in the Maersk example in TradeLens, having people from the mining sector, having people from the manufacturing sector, retailers, wildly different businesses all coming around the table to solve a common problem, one that they've made movies about, and now sustainability and ethical sourcing is at the forefront of a lot of these conversations. And that's it. Everybody has that guiding star, and they know what goal they're trying to score against.
I think just to add to that, I think what's useful potentially for the audience is, because I think what we've talked about, just reflecting on it, sometimes it's a bit daunting to think, oh my goodness, I got to get all these guys on a network. And I think there's one fundamental myth that people often jump into, thinking that you need the entire supply chain, you need everybody on board before there's any value. Now that's simply not true. I think the way that you need to approach it, and the way I found helpful to approach it, is looking for minimum viable value. So, okay, what is the minimum participation that I need for me as a participant within that network or a builder of that network to derive some value? Because that's obviously your tactical goal. You've reached that, everything else on the top of that, as those network effects kick in, as the thing naturally grows, there's all cream on the top. But you've got to obviously reach that first sort of level. And I think the other insight that's helpful is to whilst from an inclusion perspective, you need everybody, big and small, to be participants. You also got to be very cognizant of who has the leverage in these networks, who are the core contributors of data which you cannot do without, and also who is going to drive the participation of others. So while it's nice to make sure that there is broad inclusion, there's a part for everyone to play, your focus and where you need to spend your time is really on the people that are going to get those early runs on the board and be able to generate those network effects early.
Right. Would the rest of the panel agree with that approach of failing fast, going for small wins, demonstrating competency, and then growing up from there?
Yeah, 100%. For us, there was a couple key tipping points to make sure that we could, in the first instance, join up our supply chain, even the thinnest thread across this thing, to prove that what we could do would connect everyone up, and then start to do it at scale. For us, the tipping point, if anybody's read the book Crossing the Chasm, that adoption strategy, really, there's several tipping points along there as you get certain sectors of the industry on board. Each one usually drives the next. So focusing on those more innovator, early adopter companies, people who drive typically the technical influencers of an industry anyway, then it starts to all move in the same direction. And that's what we've seen in our industry.
Yeah, I mean, we have an example where today we announced in the sustainability space under seafood supply chain, we've allowed interoperability between, sea to table, and being able to source where the fish is being caught, the type of fish, and reduce wastage, reduce fraud. Someone says, I only caught 10 kilos, but they caught 20 kilos or whatever it is. And this was done with a government body in Australia, where for them, it's a $3 trillion industry. I mean, this is not small, but having inclusion right from the fishermen and having smart devices with the boxes that can measure things, using applications on phones, and then following that all the way to the table, it was the most difficult part by allowing everyone to be a participant. And you can't have the barrier to say, well, sorry, you're a fisherman, you need to be able to do X, Y, and Z. They're not going to change their processes just for you. Everyone has to adopt a common thread, as it was said. And if you're successful and if you're doing that, then that supply chain and the trade flows, and then the benefits again come back to the consumer.
Actually, I mean, Gilbert, it's a really interesting use case and really exciting to see another live application rather than the admirable theorising, which doesn't actually get us very far. And yeah, it would be great to understand if the rest of the panel have been looking at sustainability, that pressure on the manufacturing industry, on trade to reduce our economic environmental footprint. How can blockchain be leveraged to get funding, get approval where otherwise as a standalone academic project it might not necessarily garner that much interest?
If I could lead with that one, the SDGs are very central to what we're doing at Tracer. The producers of diamonds are effectively mining corporations. De Beers is backing Tracer, and if anyone's familiar, De Beers is also part of the Anglo-American Group, another enormous mining corporation, which is centrally focused on the SDGs. We have several initiatives at Tracer, and we map each one of them to which of the 17 SDGs we're helping to influence in a positive way. That's central to our culture at Tracer, and making sure that we do good for the industry, but then also for Earth.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's so important. So IBM is a B2B business. We work to make our clients go faster and be more profitable, drive more revenue, all those sorts of things. But actually underlying those sort of economic goals, our customers always talk about their customers and what they want and what they find important, and sustainability is often top of the list. In blockchain applications, we've done some work. We have a platform called Food Trust, which again, supply chain platform looking at food products, and we've done some work with S Group in Finland about sustainable fisheries, allowing consumers to see more information about where their fish was caught, the journey that it's gone through, and the benefit for the organisation is twofold. Firstly, for the consumer and their priorities and what they find important, they can feel like they're participating and see that the choices they're making as a consumer align with their beliefs. That's absolutely, so there's a top line benefit for the enterprises that we support there. But also there's an efficiency gain there from how the companies manage their supply chain. Having that increased visibility, you can look at where your bottlenecks are, try and optimize shelf life, try and optimize the relationships and flows of goods from the fisheries and the distributors themselves. So I think that's again, from a blockchain perspective, blockchain being that silver thread, those rails have multiple uses. It's not just a product that comes off the shelf, but it's something that has top line benefits from a customer engagement, as well as an efficiency play within the organization, and many more. I think there's no doubt there.
Yeah, fantastic, thank you. And Edward, obviously you're all coming at it from an SME perspective. When you're selling the vision and selling the opportunity, are you looking at more of a cost-saving value proposition, or are you looking to position it more as a sustainability play?
I believe for SMEs, the main driving, let's say, force for adoption of the blockchain is actually cost savings, because at this level, what matters most is pretty much costs and how effectively and efficiently you can deliver something. Pretty much this element of optimizing the supply chain, it has many different facets. We can look at it not only as part of the logistics, but also as part of, let's say, trade finance. So once you enter this space, we have many different processes and kind of value-added services, such as establishing authenticity of documents, etc. So there's many different ways in which having this single source of truth can help SMEs and all other participants of the supply chain to kind of optimize their costs and both do good and earn money at the same time.
Great, okay, thank you, really, really interesting. So, onto the topic of risk and security, because obviously we are dealing with a number of entities who haven't got a huge risk appetite. They're very traditional, have very traditional ways of operating and allocating their budget. So, how do you get across this? You know, just to introduce that to anybody who's less aware of the risk and security issues within IoT particularly, and then blockchain and introducing new technologies as a whole. You know, any interconnected network exposes risk to all of its stakeholders, namely around security, authenticity, confidentiality, and privacy for all of the stakeholders involved. We're already very sensitive to the threat of counterfeiting, physical tampering, hacking, and data theft within our supply chains. And adding in additional IoT can theoretically add more security to that, but the cost of doing so is extraordinary. So do we want to go for a much more expensive but much more secure solution? So research has concluded that IoT must be secure against external attacks in the perception layer, secure the aggregation layer and the network layer, and offer specific guarantees that only authorized entities can access and modify data in the application layer. So in terms of, I'm sure you're facing this every time you're going into these meetings, there's a lot of hesitancy about change full stop, let alone talking about these exciting esoteric ideas. So how are you getting over those issues of risk and security when you're getting to board level, when you're looking to secure funds? And then also, secondary to that, the final mark question. That's obviously where a lot of the slippage occurs. So it'd be great to hear the panel's approach to those ideas and concepts.
So I've worked in cybersecurity for 20 years as a chief security officer a few times in the last few roles. Security starts with trust, and at the end of the day, you can't trust people you can't control. So your environments in a supply chain, a multi-party environment, are very complex, and it's very difficult for you to embed and have the same controls on your competitors, your partners, third parties, as your own environment. You can only control up to your border. And if you look at what's happened recently, this is a board issue. The Target hack that really happened, I think it was about 5 years ago now, was from the air conditioning partner, which was connected to the Target network, and they used that to get in. So you're already on the back foot with cybersecurity and the risk that you have to manage. The way you address it is through proper risk management and through proper controls, and especially with IoT, because the devices that have come out in IoT do not have the same level of security as computers, because we've spent 20 years, 30 years improving operating systems, networks, and all the firewalls and controls that we have in place for computers, but we haven't done the same for IoT. IoTs are insecure by default, and that's what you have to work with. So the way you manage that is you have a segregated space for IoT devices, where only they can communicate with each other. There is no network they can jump into, which can affect them, and they're not on the internet, they're not on a public network, they're not on a private network, they're segregated. And for me, as a chief security officer in health, I saw this firsthand, where IoT devices that were connected to people to measure blood and different metrics, they could have been hacked, and morphine levels could have been tampered with, so people could have killed themselves. So all the thresholds could have been actually changed remotely, so you can kill people with packets. So the way we fixed that was to completely segregate that environment as an engineering environment, as a IoT environment, and having no one access it except the device, and then back to the server and nothing else. So it's very difficult, but it's possible to do.
So on our side, we thought about security and privacy, making sure that we're managing risk at effectively three main levels. The entity level within the businesses that are transacting between each other, the resource level, okay, for diamonds in the first instance, and then the data that now has become a primary resource in an industry which had a lot of latent data not used to the same degree it was today. So with all these good supply chain platforms, we keep our inventory moving around. With the TradeLens example, with all of our examples, if we keep our inventory moving around, it gains value. If it sits still, it's cost and business risk. So we're helping businesses quantify that and qualify that in different ways that they wouldn't be able to see if the supply chain wasn't connected before, while also having the right kind of privacy and security controls around sharing data and making sure and reassuring people. I had a couple calls this morning on this, explaining very clearly that we're not revealing more data between entities that we were before, because something new, we have to just make sure that it works the way that they work today. When we set out at Tracer, we set one guiding principle before all others, which was to not break the industry. It sounds silly, but it's a good feedback loop for our team to think about, are we going to do something that might make them do business in a way that kind of breaks their industry, which means they wouldn't adopt what we've built in the first place. So by helping them understand where their inventory is kind of sticky and not moving around, that helps them alleviate some of the business risks they wouldn't have had a lens on before. And then also making sure that the data sharing ecosystem is very fine-grained controlled, and they have ultimate flexibility, privacy, and security over how they're sharing this data. It gives them great confidence to use it more and more.
Pretty much, I think I can share an example which is not touching the IoT devices, but also regarding the kind of security concerns. So pretty much risk of certain centralized system being hacked is, I believe, one of the big roadblocks in adoption of these solutions, especially in logistics. So we've seen an example of one of the ports in Eastern Europe which were working on piloting the solution. A couple of years ago, there was a big cybersecurity attack called WannaCry. So there was a virus which was kind of spread via partner service and emails, and pretty much this port had to shut down their IT system for 2 days. They know that the risk pretty much of having, let's say, all their documentation, if it was electronic and if all, like, let's say, handling of the containers was electronic, it would have meant that pretty much they would have had to shut down the operations for 2 days. There is less risk with paper in this case, so they still can hand you over a container once you present the paper. There is a risk of counterfeiting this document, but they kind of know how to treat it. In this sense, I think blockchain is good because you don't have a certain like centralized database which can be hacked via one unsecure point. So you have more distributed doors. So data pretty much becomes more secure, and I think that's one of the driving forces for adoption of digital versions of documentation and generally digital storage of data in logistics.
It's very interesting seeing that governance come from the private sector. As we've seen in finance, there's been a real back and forth as to whether the regulators are establishing that better standard or whether the private sector is doing that themselves through trial and error. In these consortium models and these partnership models, how have you been establishing that governance and that better way of doing things? I know that a few of you are working on establishing standards, working with ISO, would it be
Yeah, standards are key to adoption, and innovation needs standards to flourish. And so the problem we've had with blockchain, things were being developed in isolation. It's a great technology, but we made the same mistakes of technologies of the past. So we made proprietary protocols of the internet, OSI stack versus TCP. We made proprietary networks. We made proprietary telecoms. Everything we've done in the past, we've made the same mistake with blockchain. But actually, this time around, we're doing it in collaboration. So from a governance perspective, I ended up founding the ISO standard in 2015, where now we've got 53 countries actually at the table working together to standardize the technology across all aspects. And that includes the boring low-level terminology sort of thing, so everyone can speak the common language. But then the more interesting smart contract, privacy, security, identity, interoperability, all the stuff that is applicable. And people are actively at the table making this happen, and we're seeing this adoption grow and flourish, and in a couple of years there will be published standards for everyone to work together and interoperate. And we're seeing this at the global level within ISO, but also in consortiums within technology vendors, within consortia of participants within financial services. They're coming up with a standard to do settlement. They're coming up with standards to do identity. So Sovereign, Hyperledger Foundation is doing a lot in this space. So we're actually seeing the benefits of standardization, which is quite exciting.
Yeah, in logistics, there's a pretty complicated world out there, and I think you'll see as different networks develop and grow, a drive towards standardization as a necessity to get things done more efficiently. I think, though, in the early days where there is a divergence of standardization, you need to have that flexibility to work with multiple standards. That's just the reality of life, and life is complicated. So I think whilst standardization is a direction of travel, I don't think we should consider it a prerequisite for these platforms to develop.
And for the corporates who are hesitant to effectively pick a horse and to invest for fear of vendor lock-in or for burning money and recognising 3 years later that their key competitors have become the industry standards, what would you say to them, to take that first step?
Yeah, vendor lock-in's an interesting one, and IBM as a heritage and maybe not being as flexible as we would like, for whatever various reasons. But I think our adoption and support of open standards and Linux, etc., in the last sort of 20 years has put us in a position where we know and have experienced the benefits of having open, neutral, and engaged communities where more brains around the table, whether it's coders coding independently and contributing to source code, there's a benefit there, because you firstly you have a hive mind that contributes good ideas. Secondly, you get buy-in from lots of different participants, and we're definitely taking that same approach with TradeLens. We are necessarily and very enthusiastically open and neutral from a technology stack. We'll have our technology stack. We want to enable that connectivity, but what you do with that connectivity, that's really where the flexibility comes in. Different ISVs can come and build applications on top of our standards, on top of our stack. They can interoperate with it in various ways, and I think that community approach is where you get those network effects, is where you get the drive towards standardization. And at a basic level, that's where you get applications that are actually useful for the enterprise. And that's really what all that stuff behind talking about standardization, security, vendor lock-in, and all those things. All that is the background towards a real business problem that you're trying to solve. So starting with that's important.
Yeah, I think we all want the same thing. We would like this technology to be massively implemented rather than just a theoretical proof of concept to benefit people. And everyone is working together. So I would say, keep going forward. Don't stop and wait for things. Keep building. Keep collaborating. Join consortia, create products, create technology, and eventually everything will be able to talk to each other the way your mobile phone can be used anywhere in the world today. It's going to be the same outcome.
And from our example, one of the things that really got the gears in sync was working on an open data standard. We're going to be publishing our open data standard for the diamond industry soon. This gets a lot of the technology providers who are already out there in the industry, whether it's IoT device manufacturers or scanning technology or people who make ERPs, etc., all give them sort of a Rosetta Stone to use and maybe translate to their own language, and then eventually have a common language of data across an industry. Now we've got a flywheel effect of people communicating with each other, and things emerge quickly.
Fantastic, great. Brilliant.
What would it take to make that happen quicker? Because I think you're all saying the same thing, which is you look at it as individual applications for a particular sector. If this thing doesn't take off, the investment that's required for the individual person who wants to get on
So-
drive this, rather than you guys fall over it all the time and do it individually? What does it take?
It depends. Do you mind if I just jump in there? It depends on which part how you play. I think all of us talk from the perspective of actually building these networks and building services that can then be consumed by others. I think the vast majority of enterprises, you're never going to get anywhere close to building a blockchain network because all those reasons: innovation risk. You're defining your own standards. You don't know if your competitor's doing the same thing. I think when it goes back to that vendor lock-in question as well. The vast majority of people are going to experience the benefit of blockchain through the consumption of a service through a platform, and so the advantage there is no vendor lock-in because we're all in a SaaS world, so you pay for what you get, and when you don't like it, you go to the competition, and also there's no innovation risk. You let other technology providers or other players in the industry take that innovation risk. Let them take that first leap and see if it works. And you as a consumer just be the beneficiary of that. Sure, can you define the direction of how that platform goes? Maybe you relinquish some of that. But I think the vast majority of consumption of blockchain will be really blockchain being hidden behind the covers somewhere. You probably don't even know it exists there, but you enjoy the benefits.
And that leads into a really interesting question of open source and whether this is going to be a very proprietary, very much industry-led and individual actor-led approach, or whether you want to open it up, have multiple contributors, and then just have the leads for the projects. Would you say that open source is fitting for these kinds of use cases, or is that better suited to different industries?
From our perspective, it's a matter of requirements. There's no requirement for our industry to open source the technology. We can all share it and interoperate fine. It's really there where we might stunt adoption because it's not open source technology, that we might need to get different technology partners on board to help us scale that, but we haven't hit that boundary yet.
Yeah, I think decentralization is open source in nature. Just from the outset, we've operated very closed, siloed systems. Be it healthcare, be it supply chain, be it government, finance, whatever it is. And as Massimo was saying, decentralization is the future, and we're all working together as a community to shape it. And being open source allows contribution and innovation to happen because anyone can be a participant. It's not just the Googles of the world that are making the decentralized world of the future. Everyone is, and so it's a funny juxtaposition because you're open sourcing, but you need to make some profit as well at the same time. But I think if you open source the foundation, and the value can be driven out of the applications and the services on top, and that's where decentralization will happen in the future. Whereas now you have to pay to be part of the network, whereas in the future you are the network, and you actually pay for the value on top of the network.
Okay. Pretty interesting. Yes, and then moving back to the ecosystem consortium approach, the partnerships that you're building. We've seen with R3 real adoption, real excitement from the banks. The financial industry has absolutely been brought together by that consortia. But unfortunately, a lot of people have dropped out. They feel like they've garnered sufficient understanding. They know what their competitive edge is, and then they've either left or significantly reduced their input into the projects because they want to put up those barriers of competitiveness again. How do you think in the next 2-3 years we can create more stickier networks, make sure that the bigger players, the Maersks of the world, are very much embedded and continue to be collaborative?
From my perspective, whilst there are organizational incumbencies and egos within those organizations that sometimes do irrational things, granted, I think from an enterprise perspective, responding to what their enterprise is there for usually predicts how they'll engage. And a lot of that is about us as technology providers and orchestrators of networks to demonstrate value. To go to them and say, hey, look, I can help you do what you want to do faster, with more resiliency, with more security that pleases your customer in the end. And I think the proof is in the pudding there. And I think a lot of the, 2 years ago, if you were the cool guy at the dinner party if you could explain what blockchain was. That was seen as gold standard. Now, we don't need to do that anymore. You're the cool guy at the dinner party if you're really down with blockchain. If you come in and go, it's going to go nowhere. That's kind of in vogue at the moment. And the reality is kind of in the middle. I think people are getting to the point where they're realizing that it's not a silver bullet, that it is just a database. It's something that sits in the plumbing. We're a middleware. In 5 years' time, if I'm invited to panels to talk about a database, I'll be amazed. It'll become a way of working, but we're going through that journey of understanding, okay, how does this technology, this bright, shiny thing, work in the reality of trying to deliver a service? And then it'll come out. TradeLens is a great example of that. I actually don't use the word blockchain at all when I'm talking to clients because it is only one little bit, albeit a very important bit of how we enable provenance of documents and workflows. So granted, it's really important, but what we're building is far bigger than that, and is focused on an industry problem, not a technology problem. So that's how it'll work out, in my humble opinion.
Just one point on creating the ecosystem. We're focusing on the types of business services that wouldn't have been possible or haven't been possible previously without this kind of connected supply chain platform. Good examples there are around financing and insurance. The kind of transparency that our participants can provide to a financier or somebody who's insuring now, get to a different trigger point where we can attract much more financial institutions to the industry. So those are the first wave in, and it really gets people bought into the connected idea.
Yeah, I mean, what we've seen that's very real in 2019 as opposed to 2017 or earlier is blockchain was a nice experiment and people thought it had potential and they didn't know what it could do. But in 2017, it's been implemented because people can see the dollar signs. It's allowing people to cooperate with their competition because there's a trust that they can actually gain. And by having that collaborative approach, they've got new business models and new services they can tap into to increase revenue and growth, which they couldn't do before. And that's real. So when enterprise picked up on this, everyone looked into blockchain as a new revenue stream. And all the surveys from Deloitte and PwC, there's 60 to 80% of companies that are actively using blockchain. And I think in the future, it's going to be a core component of what they do, but it'll be ubiquitous. It'll be the same way your phone does 4G and 5G packet switching, which is 1950s technology. You don't care how that works. You don't care if it's 4G, 3G, Edge, GSM, whatever it is. All you want is to be able to send that email to your friend or send a picture. That's what will happen to blockchain. All you want to do is have a secure way to transact data and value across networks, and blockchain will take care of that without you knowing it.
Yeah, touching on the point of not rather technical standards, but standards in terms of legal regulation of the industry on national level, but both kind of across the board. So there's a number of interesting initiatives. So there's UNCITRAL, pretty much model law on electronic transferable records, which was developed by United Nations. So adoption of this kinds of regulation on national levels will play an important role in kind of growing adoption of generally digital documents, but also kind of blockchain-based solutions for supply chains globally. And it's already there. It awaits adoption by governments on the national level. And I think another important players which will kind of promote adoption of these solutions, especially in logistics, is international associations. So in freight forwarding, there's an organization called FIATA, which is kind of the biggest association of freight forwarders and one of the main bodies that sets standards for bills of ladings. So I think they will play a very important role in kind of this multinational and global adoption of these standards.
Okay. We need to wrap up and then move to some questions from our fabulous audience. So, final thoughts. I was chatting to some of the people here earlier, and people are most excited in the IoT blockchain future for the reductions in fraudulent activity, increased monitoring of environmental conditions, just-in-time automated production and the sharing of more precise and timely data. Really nerdy, exciting opportunities there. So I wanted to hear from the panel what each of you are most excited to see in the next few years in the economy of things and into this new world of interoperability that we're moving into. So Jim?
So from our perspective, connecting up the diamond supply chain opens up opportunities across the board. So we spend a lot of time in Southern Africa, Canada, Russia, all over the world. It also opens up those areas to new opportunities in terms of cultivating knowledge economies and bringing technology into those zones that wouldn't have naturally found their way there otherwise. Whether it starts by gig economy of helping label AI data all the way to creating a data science team in Botswana. That's the kind of, when we say leveling the playing field economically, we should also be creating an equitable distribution and access to knowledge across these supply chains and cultivating those jobs and those skill sets in those zones. It can open up whole new economies to countries.
Really exciting. Edward, would you like to?
Yeah, so for me, I think the biggest improvement of efficiency comes pretty much from, as I mentioned, creation of the single source of truth, because it cheaps, and if we're talking about logistics, not only in actual transfer of goods, but in all these additional processes which kind of surround cross-border trade and logistics. So it's pretty much authentication of documents and information on like trade finance, insurance, quality control, etc. So once we can establish this kind of in-time and authentic source of truth, it creates like immense opportunities for improvement of efficiency in many other kind of sister industries.
I'm super excited because the world is only 10% digitized right now, and that's really limited to access to the internet, all the automation and digitization that's happened to date, and the limitations of technologies on the internet. So what's left is the other 90%, and that's where blockchain really comes in, where we can actually automate, digitize, and have flows that are taking humans out of the equation, that can automate trade, that can automate transactions, value transfer, and that intersection of IoT, AI, and blockchain is the enabler to make this new possibility happen, and that's just super exciting.
Yeah, for me, and selfishly looking at trade applications of blockchain, the most exciting thing I see on the horizon is electronic bills of lading. So ownership being represented in a digital form rather than a paper form, and it sounds like just a step on the digitization train, but it's so much more significant than that. If you can, and granted it's a huge problem, it's a 400-year-old problem, so it's not an easy one to just turn on a dime, but we're not too far away. But that ownership and that ability to then manage your working capital, we're talking about a $12 trillion business here of trade moving across the sea. If now you can, using blockchain and solving that double spend problem, be able to change ownership by a click of a button rather than a piece of paper going in a courier, that just opens up a whole raft of different opportunities: settlement, collateralization, working capital management, FX. It's a very exciting advent, and I think it will dwarf the efficiency savings that the kind of the lower order digitization can achieve.
Fantastic, wonderful, thank you. Really well-rounded set of answers there. So we can now open up to questions from the floor. Nick, of course, troublemaker in the background.
We had a rather depressing, I thought, prognosis from Massimo just before, saying that 20 years ago London was a place to come, and that we're falling behind. I think we may be aware of some of the reasons for that. First of all, do you agree with him? And secondly, how do we get ourselves out of that? How do we get back into sort of global leadership in the sort of fintech, tech, financial services and logistics world?
Yeah, I can speak financial services. So Libra was a catalyst. It was really a call to arms because everyone has been thinking about the benefits of digital assets and central banks having digital currencies, and then Libra happened, and now everyone's just scrambling to figure, okay, well, they're going to do it, and it's a private company owning monetary policy in our sovereign state. That's a problem. I think where the UK can lead is having the right type of regulation to foster this type of innovation, because if you look at the adoption of blockchain, and if you look at the financial services specifically, having central bank digital assets gives you a GDP growth because you've got access to central bank money. So I think there's an opportunity for the Bank of England to actually step in and instead of writing the theory of why this is good and letting someone else do it, I think the UK can do it first. So I don't think that we're behind. I think we're still, up front. But you've got nations like China trying to, overtake other countries and do this. But it's all about getting off the dependency of the US dollar, and instead of the US fighting this, they have an opportunity to adopt it as well.
I think agree with all those points, but I think in the end, this all boils down to people, right? These things aren't going to animate themselves. There's no AI that's going to step in and do it for us. If we're attracting the right minds to achieve these things, depending if it's a geography or an industry, that's going to be how we bring these things to fruition. It's attracting the right kind of minds to collaborate together and achieve something.
Edward, obviously you're doing a lot of international work, so do you have any comments on how, and you obviously based yourself in the UK, how this has been a better place to operate from rather than the rest of Europe?
So I think pretty much it's important to understand that UK is, there's obviously some drawbacks, but there's some nice things regulators are doing in UK. So there's a FCA sandbox which works with fintechs, insurtechs, etc. So that's a great initiative, and I think something similar can be implemented in many other government agencies. So if we're talking here about supply chains and international trade, I think kind of those kinds of initiatives in HMRC, it has a great potential to kind of drive innovations towards UK economy, especially when we're talking about supply chain and we face kind of uncertainty regarding Brexit. 60% of trade which happens in UK is with continental Europe. So we're now facing a moment where we have uncertainty about the way the 60% of cross-border logistics will be governed in UK, and we have these big challenges for supply chains in UK. So kind of this adoption of and openness of government agencies to innovation, I think can first help to overcome the challenges that might be facing UK economy, and potentially kind of increase competitiveness of UK enterprises on the global scale.
Thank you. I've got two questions. First of all, regarding supply chain and those IoT devices. We had a lady from AgriLedger, and she was trying to train farmers how to do stuff properly and record that on the ledger and to move it up the chain. So I believe that blockchains will grab a lot of value, okay? And do you believe that some of that value will be given to those people at the beginning, which are farmers? That lady was hoping that from 2-3 cents that they are paid now, they are able to get, because of blockchains, they'll be able to be paid like 80 pence out of $1. Do you think that blockchains will enable that value to be transferred to the people at the beginning? And how would you ensure that those people actually will do it properly? So the first data, the most important data that goes into blockchain is the correct data. And the second question, do you think that blockchains in the future will be like Google's and Facebook's of today? So they're going to grab the value and they will not share at all? Or will those blockchains be actually more democratized and they will share value with every participant?
I've got answers to both. On the first one, yes, and on the second one, no. So maybe I can elaborate. Yes.
What this?
Yeah. So in our industry, beneficiation is a massive driver for making sure that the industry is a healthy industry. And in the diamond industry, there's well over 10 billion. I think it's 15 billion that's brought back to the producer countries by way of an equitable distribution of jobs infrastructure, etc., education, healthcare. There's a number of examples. The knowledge economy also plays an important part in this. Bringing technology into those zones that wouldn't otherwise be there now opens up other completely different economies and gives them other opportunities to create things in a different way. On the second point, is will the blockchain companies be the Googles and the Facebooks and can control their things? I think the nature of the technology being decentralized and the platform being inclusive, no. I think that there'll be important utilities for industries, maybe countries, maybe the globe, and I think it'll be a lot more distributed or decentralized in terms of the value and also who's included in it.
Yeah, I think your first point, the originators of data at the start of a chain. If we think of a linear supply chain, I think that's where and that's the challenge for those developing those systems and platforms. They are obviously the source of the original data, so a lot of care and attention has to be given to say, okay, well, what will engender their participation? If it's just an expectation that they will just do it out of the goods of their heart, obviously it's not going to go anywhere. So those platforms, whatever it is, need to make sure that there's value capture at that original point if they are important contributors of data. Whether that's through being able to prove differentiation, whether it's through I can prove that my potatoes are organic, or something in the efficiency, that has to be built into the platform. Otherwise, the platform will fail. It's fairly simple.
Is that will those farmers be some kind incentivized? Because if he's doing the same job for 2 cents, why would he bother with any IoT device and attach it for the same price?
Absolutely.
It doesn't make sense.
If it doesn't make sense, it won't happen. I think that will be if you're not cognizant of those realities, both economic realities and also just functional realities about how you engage these the people that are important to you. What is their sophistication when it comes to IT? How do you help them? Yeah, all those things need to be addressed, absolutely.
And leveraging opportunities like trade finance can be really helpful there, ensuring that they've got the working capital finance, off it, so they're not having to go to the banks. They don't have a sufficiently established business to be able to get favourable lending terms by demonstrating their competency over and over again, recorded in the blockchain, by being able to look at crowdfunding, different alternative funding mechanisms. You can look at incentivization methods from a direct financial opportunity versus just asking them to, as you say, pick up the IoT devices because the people at the top of the supply chain want them to.
Of all the actors along the supply chain, where are you finding most demand for blockchain from? Whether it's retailers or manufacturers?
Yeah, ours is pretty broadly distributed. Yeah, between both ends of the trade, the guys in the middle who actually move the goods, and then also what I term the facilitators of trade, so the banks, trade finance. Insurance, yeah, definitely, because it's all the same information. It's all the same information that can be transformed and used in different ways for the benefit of different players that have different businesses.
Just on that, the middle typically gets squeezed in any supply chain, so those are the ones that might be the most aware of the change. So we have to make sure that they understand the value to this specifically for them. That everybody has to see the value. But I would say that's something not to miss when bringing one of these out, is address the middle first almost.
Wonderful. Okay, thank you so much, audience, for some really wonderful questions there, and thank you to our incredible panel, Jim, Edouard, Gilbert, and Richard. Really appreciate your time, and yeah,